Hello, Priscilla. This is going to be a video for lesson 71. This is Tuesday's assignment, and this lesson is on fractions, percents, and decimals. Now, fractions, percents, and decimals are all cousins. Basically, we are able to use fractions and percents and decimals to describe or name a part of a whole. And they're interchangeable. So what that means is we can take fractions and turn them into percents and decimals, or we can take percents and change them into fractions and decimals, or we can take decimals and change them into fractions and percents. And we can do all of this with fractions and decimals pretty easily. For example, this is a whole circle. So a whole circle counts as one. It's one whole. So if we're talking about one in terms of percent, we would say it's 100%. Now, 100% is our largest percent. You can't really go over that. If we're talking in terms of a decimal, it's not a decimal because it's one whole. So it's just the number 1. If we're talking in terms of a fraction, it's 1 over 1. It's 1 out of 1 part, which when you reduce it equals 1 whole. Now, let's cut this circle in half, and let's shade in half of that circle. Now we've taken this whole and we've cut it into 2, and we've given it 2 parts. We've shaded in 1 of the 2 parts. So that becomes our fraction. It's 1 of 2 parts is shaded. When we're talking about a decimal, we know that this is 50%. But if you didn't know, you would have to take that fraction and divide it. So you'd go 1 divided by 2. Can 2 go into 1? No. So we put a decimal here, and we put the decimal up there, and we add a 0. Can 2 go into 10? Yes. 5 times. So our decimal is 0.5. Okay? Now, let's cut this circle in half again. That gives us 4 parts, and we're going to shade in 1 more part. So that gives us 3 out of 4 parts shaded. So that's our fraction. If we are to count in percents, we can break this into 4 parts: 25, 50, 75%. Now, if we're going to talk about a decimal, it would become 0.75. Now, I want you to notice a pattern here. Your decimals and your decimals and percents are always the same numbers. Do you see that? So, if we're converting a percent, like 75%, into a decimal, all we have to do is move the decimal place 2 places. Right now the decimal's right there. To make it into a decimal, we move it 2 backwards or 2 to the left. If we are taking that same decimal and we want to change it into a percent, we move the decimal 2 places, but the other direction. So now we will go forward or 2 to the right. And you can see how we can easily go back and forth with decimals and percents. Let's do another one. We have 0.92. This time I want to change it to a percent. So I'm going to move the decimal 2 to the right, which becomes 92%. Now I want to change it back to a decimal. So I move it 2 to the left, which becomes 0.92. And let's do one more. Let's do 4, cross that out, percent. It's a little bit trickier. There's only one number, but I still have to move the decimal 2 to the left. So I go 1, 2. which is going to make it into 0.04. Now I'm going to take 0.04 and turn it into a percent. So I move it 2 to the right, which becomes 4%. So changing percents into decimals and decimals into percents is really easy. You just have to remember which direction to go. You always move the decimal 2 places. A little bit trickier is taking decimals and turning them into fractions. So let's say we have 75% and 0.75. And you need to turn these into fractions. Now the percent is really easy because remember, what's the biggest percent? 100. So all you have to do is take the 75 and put it over 100 because that's our biggest percent. Now decimals is where kids get confused. It's still easy, but they just tend to forget the simple rule. You just have to count your place values. So this is the tenths and this is the hundredth spot. So we're going to put it 75 over 100 because 75 is in the hundredths place. Let's say we have 0.62. Again, we want to change it into a fraction. We count the places, tenths, hundredths. So it's going to be 62 over 100. Seems easy enough. Now let's throw in a curveball. Let's do 5 or 0.5 as a decimal. Same thing. We're going to count the places. Tenths. It's just the tenths. So it's simply 5 over 10. Or if it's 0.04, tenths, hundredths. 4 over 100. I could put the 0 there, but it's not needed, so I don't have to. 0.2. It's going to be 2, and what's the place value? Tenths. So it's going to be 2 tenths. 312. 0.312. Tenths, hundreds, thousands. So it would be 312 over 1,000. That's how you change a decimal to a fraction. Now, of course, you have some reducing here to do. For example, you can divide out 4 by both of these. 4 divided by 4 is 1. 100 divided by 100 divided by 4 is 25. Your answer would actually be that. 2 divided by 2 and 10 divided by 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. 10 divided by 2 is 5. So there's some reducing there, but you kind of already know how to do that, so you should be fine on that.